right, guys, welcome back. I'm going to dive into these asks and see how many I can get done. Um, so excited to see Beth on screen, but I am also, sorry, I got distracted by my phone, but I'm also worried it's going to be Maggie dying and seeing Beth. LOL, help. I mean, I'm not too worried about that. I think Maggie's got more stories to tell. And I mean, keep in mind, okay, Tyrese's hallucination was a death thing, but Rick's was not. Um, I will say that Rick was injured pretty badly, and they kind of tried to fake us out like it might be a death thing. So I can see maybe Maggie being injured, and that's why she's having this hallucination. But I don't know. I'm not that worried about Maggie dying. I guess I don't really have any evidence for it, so I can't really comfort you too much in that. But I just think if they're bringing, even she talked about how they're probably going to bring people back into one show, and so I think that she will, whatever, whatever vehicle, super show that they're going to bring everyone back to. I do think Maggie will be part of that for at least a little while. So, I hope she doesn't die, but I kind of, I'm not too worried about it, like I said. So we'll just have to wait and see. I would just like to remind everyone with the recent DCS3 leaks that JDM's wife is a Bethel fan. Yes, she is. JDM is also a producer on the show. Happy wife, happy life. I like that. Yeah, well, and I mean, I think, um, that was a few years ago now. It was during actually the Leah stuff, which is kind of interesting because we had the bonus episodes and we did like Find Me, and then I think right after that was Here's Negan, in which, his wife actually played Lucille, and that's when she said that she liked Daryl and Beth. And so I think that being a big part of the show, like they just knew what was coming, what was happening. And of course, with the Leah arc going on, there had to be some discussion of Daryl's love life and where they were actually going with it. So I just think that um, Jeffrey Dean Morgan and his wife Hilarie, they knew about it. And so that's part of why they did that, to kind of do a promo for it. So it kind of just makes sense, right? Especially with now, I mean, if he, again, this just goes back to they know a lot more than they tell us that they know, the actors, I mean. I think that if we're right, that he is going to play a role, Negan, I mean, in bringing Beth back or, helping her reconnect with Team Family. I think Jeffrey Dean Morgan has probably known that for a long time. He was such a big part of the show, and, starting in end of season 6 anyway. And that he just would have known where they were going with his character. And so he probably, who knows, he might have known all the way back in season 6 and 7 that this was going to be happening. We don't know that for sure, but I'm positive that by the time they did that, when his wife said the thing about Daryl and Beth, I'm positive they knew by that point. So anyway, great point here, and I agree, and it's definitely pieces are clicking into place, right? Which is really great. Gonna miss Team Delusional when Beth comes back. I'll miss doing all the theories and reading everyone's thoughts. She's on her way, baby. Agreed. I mean, I think we'll still be here analyzing stuff, but I know what you mean. It'll be different because she'll be back. So, yeah. I feel like they're being disrespectful to Beth and EK. If they try to bring closure to Beth through a dream sequence, I will punch my laptop. That's bullshit. She deserves to have survived. She deserves a real true ending. Not saying other characters didn't, but Beth got shafted real bad. Sorry, I'm hustling. Not sure how to feel about the sequence coming up. Um, I'm gonna assume that you are thinking this is how they're gonna give her closure because of some of the articles. They've kind of said that um, there was a lot of people who complained when Beth was shot and complained that she didn't get closure, and now they're bringing her back as though to get closure. Um, so yeah, I mean that is what a lot of the articles are saying, or at least implying. But I actually don't think that's the case. I don't think they're trying to use this to bring her closure. That is something that would be said by someone who doesn't think she's alive and coming back. And so that's what they would assume, right? I mean, especially if you think of somebody like Morales, who, we've actually used to make a point that Gimple does not leave loose ends. Like 8 seasons later, he brought Morales back just to kill him off so that there would be closure on that storyline, right? So no way he's going to take a character as big as Beth was and so important to Daryl and all of that and not give her closure. But I don't think that this sequence is really meant to give her closure. That's just something that media outlets are inferring. And really, I think of the AU sequence, whatever it ends up being, I think of it as a foreshadow that she's about to show up, and so that's why they're doing the AU sequence. But I mean, they're not going to show us what she looks like when she shows up, what she looks like in the apocalypse. They're willing to show us this because that way they have plausible deniability. Oh, it's just a dream sequence. You know what I mean? So it'll get people to watch without actually giving away the farm, which is actually really smart of them. So I understand, and I would agree that that would be terrible for them to just try to like fling some closure at us with a random AU sequence, but I don't think that's what's happening here at all. I think that's just what people who are not in the know are assuming is happening, and they are not the powers that be. So we shouldn't be trusting what they're saying. That's all. All right, binged a bunch of your older videos yesterday, fell down a rabbit hole, that happens, that led to character after character in blue shirts dying. The list is endless. Heath is the only name on the list that is confirmed not dead yet. Also realized that Beth showing up in Maggie's vision satisfies the rule of three. This will be the third time we see Beth in another character's hallucination. Ooh, I didn't realize that. First Tyrese, the sacred deer, then Rick, Agamemnon, and now Maggie, Artemis. Interesting. I like that. If Beth were truly dead, I think she would have died in her hospital scrubs. Yellow covered in gray reads to me as hope trapped in limbo. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So if you guys haven't read The Art of Suicide's Odyssey posts, go read those because they're really interesting and I really like them. And I 100% think that she's right in that symbolism, and it just perfectly shows that TD is right and Beth is returning and Daryl's happy ending will be Beth and all of that. So yeah, thanks. I hadn't thought about that as a rule of three. And interesting about the blue shirts, I do remember, it seems like I remember looking at that at one point, but I think it was so early on, there hadn't been enough people in blue shirts. And so um, it just never went anywhere. So yeah, that's really super interesting. All right, thank you for that. It could be nothing, but a day or two before Emily was seen filming for Dead City, Norman shared a picture of the Statue of Liberty. It caught my attention before we saw her, and now I'm having a hard time believing it's a coincidence. Yeah, it's probably not. There was a time when I didn't like looking at the actor's social media because I just figured it was outside the show, and I wasn't sure I trusted it as um, a source for our theories. But yeah, I got over that quite a while ago because it's really obvious that they very often put hints on their social media accounts. And so even I don't know, even if it wasn't, if it just didn't happen that this one was a hint, yeah, it's just for him to be posting that and then her show up filming in New York only a few days later. Yeah, it's just let's put it this way. If that one just so happens not to be a hint and it was a coincidence that he posted that, well, at this point we can't be blamed for thinking that it was because they put hints on their social media too often. But I'm with you. I doubt it was a coincidence. I think it was probably a hint. All right, Rogue Ostrich. There's a deleted scene from Coda of Rick telling Daryl that if Carl was stuck in the hospital, he'd do exactly what Daryl was doing for Beth. This obviously is just him using the closest person to him as an example to let Daryl know, hey, I get it. But do you think it could also be a suggestion that Rick didn't understand exactly the kind of relationship Daryl had with Beth, possibly like a lot of fans mistaking a romantic connection for a more brotherly or maybe even fatherly one? I've always interpreted that Rick actually had an idea on how close Beth meant to Daryl, but maybe not in the way I originally thought. What do you think? Yeah, I think, well, okay, so first of all, Beth's name isn't actually mentioned in that deleted scene. And remember that Carol is in there too. So it's even hard to know which person, you know, that Rick is talking about there. Um, but I mean, at the same time, I don't think that he was discounting Beth by any means. I mean, I think he's thinking that, of course, Daryl and Carol are really good friends, and everybody knows that. Rick knows that, of course. But also, he knows that Daryl and Beth were alone together on the road and that she was then taken and kidnapped. And so, just, I mean, in terms of like a male perspective that is really protective of people, whether Rick is thinking that Daryl thought of Beth, as something romantic or something platonic. I think what he's thinking is that she was taken from him, and that's going to piss anybody off, you know? I mean, that would piss Rick off, whether it was Carl or somebody else. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right that he's just using the closest person to him who he is the most concerned with to say that he can tell that Daryl really cares about both of these women who are in the hospital, and he's just saying, yeah, if it were me, I would do whatever I needed to, and you know, so I think you're right about that. But as for what he actually understood about their relationship, I don't think anybody understood the romantic element of the relationship, any of Team Family, I mean, because why would they? It wasn't really like that before they left the prison. There were hints of it, of course, but it wasn't like they were dating and everybody knew they were dating or something. You know what I mean? Nothing had happened. And so, and because they were the only ones together on the road, Beth and Daryl, like, there's no reason anybody would know that anything had happened or that there were feelings there, you know? So I think the extent of how he felt about her, they didn't really understand it until after he lost her. Um, and then you can kind of see it in what they say to him and how they look at him. So you have Carol giving him Beth's knife and the way she's looking at him. You can tell she's trying to figure it out, but he's obviously in a great deal of pain. And so, you know, they're trying to be there for him, but also not like make him relive it or talk about it because he's obviously not comfortable with that. We have Rick actually saying, I know you lost something back there, but he doesn't say what that specifically was. So that tells me he didn't entirely know. But he does know that Daryl's a very private person. Daryl wasn't talking near as much back then as he does now in, you know, Daryl Dixon spinoff. So yeah, I think it's very possible that they didn't understand what the relationship was, at least not until after. And I guess I always kind of have a little bit of a headcanon that um, when Beth shows up and when her and Daryl actually, you know, start their relationship and everything, things will just sort of click for other members of Team Family, and they'll be like, "Yeah, that tracks," given like how grief-stricken he was when he lost her, even if nothing really happened before. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if they actually talk about it. It's one of those things that they were definitely walking on eggshells around him, but that was because of his grief, and they were trying to help him without like re-traumatizing him or pushing him over the edge or anything. Um, and then since then, it's just, you know, they don't talk about the ones they've lost all that much. So nobody's really brought it up to him. I mean, you had Maggie mentioning Beth's death in Home Sweet Home, but that was pretty much it, right? So it'll be interesting to see if any of them talk about it when she comes back. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. I do think that they didn't completely understand it, but when they saw his grief, they must have known the had some idea of the depth of his caring for her, but I don't that wouldn't have necessarily told them whether it was romantic or not. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it when she returns. Thank you for that. Just realized rewatching still for I don't think I'm gonna attempt that number. What is that? 10 billion, I think 946,000 million 383,647 times. I love it. Okay, that you realize that Beth has a piece of dirt right on her forehead where she gets shot, like it's a perfect circle, just a little smaller and a bit down from her actual injury. And they say the decision was last minute. Nope, they knew what they were doing all the way back in season four. 100,000 or 10 billion, your same number percent agree. Um, and when I do, I'm going to get together this Carl video, and that's part of why I want to do it, is to show you the whole sequence and how they did show it to us in the show. It was not obvious because they never make it obvious. They make us work for the symbolism, but yeah, 100%. When Gimple took over in season four, he knew he had Beth's whole arc, everything that happened to Grady. He knew he was going to be killing Carl off, which is very different than the comic books. And he knew he must have known then that he was going to be saving Negan, which in the comic books, Negan does survive till the end, so that's not a huge shock. But he knew, I mean, you know, because they always remix everything, I don't think it would have been a huge shock to anybody if he had killed Negan off at the end of All Out War, that people would have just said, oh, he's just doing it differently than the comics, you know? But he knew that he would be keeping Negan around and that Carl's death through Negan would lead to Beth. Like he knew all of that, you guys. He had it all. So I'm gonna prove that to you once I do that video. Hopefully it'll be the next one. So yeah, totally agree. Let's see. Hey, I'm not sure if this was already talked about before, but I figured I would mention it as I'm watching Dead City. I'm on season 1, episode 6. This is what I need to do is the Dead City rewatch. And something really stood out to me. Maggie and Negan are talking, and Maggie mentions the Statue of Liberty, Santa, and New York. This is what Maggie said during that conversation. For me, it wasn't the Statue of Liberty, it was Macy's. When I was little, after my mom got sick, I'd crawl into bed with her and she'd tell me stories about Santa, the real Santa. Sometimes he'd come down to the North Pole to the Macy's store in Manhattan and visit all the kids. And I used to daydream that one day I'd go to New York, walk into that Macy's, become best friends with the real Santa. He'd take all the toys that I'd lost or that had been broken, and he'd find a way to replace them. Yeah, that's a really interesting statement. And I'm sure we probably talked about it or at least pointed to it back when, this first aired. Okay, well, we had a Christmas um, reference here. We had a Santa reference. I'm sure we did, but this is one of the great things, and sorry, I will finish reading your ask here, but this is why it comes together so slowly because they move the arc so slowly. And we would have seen this before as a Beth reference, but now Maggie's arc is starting to fall into place and where they're going with her, which we didn't have before. We didn't know exactly where they were going with her. So, what really stood out to me is that this AU or dreamlike sequence is literally what Maggie is describing in that conversation with Negan. She specifically mentions the Statue of Liberty, Santa, New York, and Christmas, and that's exactly where we see her in New York near the Statue of Liberty during Christmas time with Beth there. That parallel feels way too intentional to be a coincidence. Yeah, it's not a coincidence at all. The other part that really stood out to me was when Maggie talks about Santa taking the toys she either lost or that were broken and finding a way to replace them. Exactly. To me, that feels symbolic of Beth. Beth is someone Maggie lost, and her death also left Maggie broken. It makes the scene feel less like a random memory and more like a symbolic or emotional AU, where Maggie is finally in a space where what was lost or broken can exist again. So interesting. Yeah, exactly. You're laying it out perfectly. And this is what I mean when I say Maggie's arc. Suddenly, it's making more sense why the music box was broken. I mean, we always equated that to Beth being shot, but she is somebody that Maggie seen, you know what I mean? Like, it almost sounds like we're objectifying Beth in a bad way, but we're not. It's just the symbol that they use that Beth is like a broken toy, right? Um, and then she comes back to life. The music box comes back to life. But it specifically talks about he'd find a way to replace them. Now, the other thing then that would be broken, because the broken toy represents people Maggie has lost, right? So it's like parts of her broke off. Like you said, it breaks her in various ways. And the biggest one, of course, is going to be Glenn for her. Now, Glenn cannot come back, so he can't be fixed, but he could be replaced, again, not meaning like to actually emotionally replace Glenn, but in Maggie's life by bringing back a different person she lost or a different broken toy that is now fixed, right? Just really, really interesting. You're right. It's so interesting. But I think that's what they're going for here is that in order to, and Negan will have some part in this, that he will bring back Beth in order to make up or atone, if you will, for having killed Glenn. Because at this point, he had no remorse after he first killed Glenn, and even during All Out War, he had really none. But now he does. And I think if he could take it back, he would. But of course, that's not something we can take back. So if he can find a way to bring Beth back to Maggie, that will go a long way toward atoning. So yeah, I had completely forgotten about this quote that Maggie had said. And like I said, I'm sure we at least mentioned it, the symbolism in it, but we didn't understand where it fit back then in the grand scheme, especially of Maggie's um, arc. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm gonna try really hard to go back and do the rewatch to get like a. That's the other thing is we always look at things on a symbol level, right? That's kind of what we do on Team Delusional, but sometimes it's important to take a step back and look at the arc as a whole and say, okay, between these 4 episodes, this is where they were going. And this is, what they were trying to bring across to us. But watching it episode by episode, especially every week when it was just on cable weekly, sometimes you don't make those connections. So I think if we can go back and watch all of Dead City all at once, we'll start to see the shape of the story they're telling, but they're telling it over 3 or 4 seasons, not just a few episodes, right? Which is why it can be a little bit confusing at times. So yeah, thank you for that. That's a fantastic quote, and it fits really well. So thanks for sending that in. Them showing Emily so openly actually makes me nervous, not relieved. It seems like they're closing the Beth is alive possibility. No, I mean, I've kind of been over this already, but I don't think that. I think the main reason they are going out of their way to show her to us is to drum up promo and get more and more people to watch the show. And I think it's going to be a foreshadow of her showing up in real life. And I mean, think about it this way. They did, and I don't know, maybe this isn't the best. Maybe this is, well, no, no, because Morgan was in it too. So I was going to say, think about Rick's hallucination. Um, he saw a lot of people, and a lot of them were already deceased, like Sasha, we heard Abraham's voice, Shane, all of that. But there were other people in his hallucination too. Well, there was Beth, first of all, which we can't prove she's alive yet because she hasn't actually returned yet. But Morgan was also in it, and Morgan hasn't gone anywhere. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't read into the hallucination as for sure being one thing or another. Um, they're definitely foreshadowing with it. They're definitely trying to tell us something with it. But just because somebody is, if you look at Morgan, just because Morgan was in Rick's hallucination, or we at least heard his voice, didn't mean he was alive or dead on the outside. I think in that case, he and Rick weren't in the same place anymore. I mean, Morgan had taken off and gone to Fear the Walking Dead, so he wasn't in Georgia. He took off running, during All Out War, and Rick didn't see him anymore. And so I think it was a matter of Rick kind of having lost him as a person and a friend because he didn't know where Morgan was or if he was ever going to see him again. And that's probably why he showed up in the hallucination. But the truth is, Morgan was alive and well. Rick just didn't know where or if he was alive and well. So I think that could be true, possibly across the board. Anybody seen in a hallucination, it just doesn't mean anything one way or the other about them being alive or dead because in some cases they're alive and in some cases they're dead. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. And yeah, I don't know if that helps, but I hope it does. All right, guys, for right now, that is all the asks that I have. Like I said, I will be back soon, hopefully, with this Carl video. I just mostly have to track down the uh, screenshots so that I can show them to you, which I will. But for now, thank you for listening, and here's hoping we get a lot more stuff really soon now that we're in the new year. And hopefully we get an air date for Dead City soon so that we can plan for it. I'm sure we will eventually. But anyway, I will talk to you guys soon. Everyone have a fantastic week. And yeah,